university of education that we know to be a very prestigious institution. We're all familiar with the graduation speeches, which are designed to honor and to encourage those receiving their diplomas as they take their leave and they take their place in the world. Well, the person giving this particular speech said, "You as graduates are going to be sent out into this world for good. And most of you are not ready for this. The president of the university is about to acknowledge that you belong to the fellowship of educated men and women. And you know just how dumb you really are." Some graduates were shocked that the speaker would say something like that on their day. Other graduates kind of nodded in agreement. The speaker continued and said, "And the worst thing about all this is that the world, especially your parents, are going to expect that you will be among the brightest and the very best the world has to offer. But you know that you're not. By noon today, you will be on your way. You will be out of here. By tomorrow, you're going to be history. That's the fact." And then the speaker smiled and finished his speech saying, "Nevertheless, there is reason to hope. Our God has not brought you this far, to this place, to simply abandon you, to leave you here alone and afraid. No, God will always be with you. Therefore, my beloved and bewildered young friends, do not be afraid. Our God will always be with you." One of the students responded out loud, "Thanks, but that's easier said than done." Well, after reading that speech, I had to wonder if something similar didn't take place with the disciples on the day of the ascension. There Jesus has his disciples before him. I have to wonder if they were ready to do what was going to be expected of them. Jesus was telling them, "Okay, it's all up to you now." Jesus had done everything he could for them, and now it was their turn. Do you think maybe they were a bit fearful? Because after all, they had seen what had happened to the one that they're following. They had seen the Master, the Son of God, what happened to him. Do you think maybe they were a bit fearful? I would say it's safe to say, sure. I think they even questioned at some time their personal ability with what Jesus was going to ask them to do. Because after all, in the end, Jesus, the one that came to believe that was the Messiah, the Son of God, the Christ, Jesus really convinced very few people to believe in his message. I think the disciples knew that in general, people just don't believe immediately as a matter of fact. No, we as human beings tend to want proof, concrete proof. There's that story about the man who was sat next to a young lady on the plane, and the young lady had her Bible open, and she was reading some scriptures for her daily devotional. The man, however, he didn't believe in God. He thought it was all nonsense. And so he kind of rolled his eyes and said, "Come on, do you really believe what you're reading in that Bible?" And very confidently, the young lady said, "Yes, I do, with all my heart." He then said, "Even that story about that guy named Jonah, who was placed in the belly of a big fish for 3 days Come on, how could he survive? And the young lady said, I don't know. But when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask him. The man very sarcastically said, and what if he's not in heaven? And the young lady said, then you can ask him. You know what? People don't tend to believe immediately. They don't tend to believe as a matter of fact. No, I think humanity needs proof, concrete proof. And so there the disciples were, and Jesus was saying, your turn. The question was, how are they going to prove to the world that Jesus was born, that he died, that he was buried, and that he rose from the dead? I think there's one thing that they could point to immediately that would give evidence. And that is simply the empty tomb of Jesus. Because to me, that's strong evidence. There has been nothing that has ever been able to explain that empty tomb of Jesus. That is nothing except the words of that angel that day when he said to the disciples, Jesus is not here. He is risen from the dead as he said he would. I think that's strong evidence. Because the Roman authorities could have squashed the preaching about the resurrected Christ immediately. All they had to do was go to the tomb and produce the empty body, the dead body of Jesus. All they had to do when the disciples were preaching the resurrected Lord was to go to the tomb and show the people, wait a minute, he's not resurrected. There's the lifeless body of Jesus right there. That would have immediately have silenced the disciples. There's evidence, concrete evidence. But the Roman authorities never did that. Do you know why? Because there was no lifeless body of Jesus. He had truly been risen from the dead. But my friends, I think there's even stronger evidence for the people to believe. In fact, it might be the strongest evidence we have. What was so convincing to believe in the resurrection of Jesus was the transformation of the disciples. When Jesus died, the disciples were brokenhearted. They were confused. They were frightened. They hid themselves. But within weeks, they were changed men. They were no longer fearful, but courageous, willing to die for their faith in the resurrected Christ. Others tried to stop them. They were beaten, whipped, imprisoned, persecuted, and some were even killed. You would have thought that would have stopped them, but it didn't. The disciples continued to build on what Jesus had started. Let's admit, maybe they weren't ready on the day of the ascension, but once they received the Holy Spirit, once they had received that gift, they were pretty convincing. And because of them, others would believe. My friends, we are the church we are today because of those first disciples who put into practice that which they knew to be true. They were willing to put their life on the line to prove that. When others saw how they did their lives, they couldn't help but to believe. My friends, the kind of church that we're going to have tomorrow depends upon how we live out our faith today. And so, let me ask you a question. Question for every one of us in this church. Can you point to at least one thing in your life that helps others believe in the resurrection of Jesus?